Have you ever noticed how some people don't control you with rules, but with doubt? They don't yell, they don't confront. Instead, they twist the edges of your words, blur the clarity of your thoughts, and leave you wondering, was it really that bad? At first, you speak with certainty, but slowly their smirks and subtle remarks begin to chip away at that confidence until you're questioning things you once knew for sure. It's like being handed a glass of clear water with a single drop of something bitter. At first, you drink it, trusting what you see, but slowly the taste changes. You sip again, confused. Was it always like this? You're not sure. Or think of a candle slowly dimming, not because the flame is gone, but because someone keeps cupping their hand around it little by little. That's how your confidence fades, not from a blow, but from shadows cast slowly. Because while they're busy distorting your truth, you have a choice. Keep playing along or tune back into your own frequency. And when you do, that's when the illusion cracks. That's when their quiet control begins to fall apart. So how do you recognize when someone's not debating you, but slowly untying your trust in yourself? Stay until the end, because once you see the signs, you'll never let them blind you again. Let's get started. But before we dive in, pay attention to this story, which will help you better understand the wisdom in this material. The story of Riley. The shadow that shifted behind the smile. Riley had always trusted her gut. She wasn't loud, but she was steady. She read people well, noticed things others missed, and when something didn't feel right, she paused. But somewhere along the way, she began second-guessing herself. Not because she suddenly became unsure, but because someone kept making her question what she already knew. It started small. A friend who'd say, "You're overthinking again," whenever Riley brought up something that felt off. A co-worker who constantly replied, "That's not what I said," when Riley repeated their own words back to them. A partner who'd say, "You're too sensitive," after every subtle jab. Slowly, things that once felt like facts began to blur. Riley stopped trusting her instincts, not because they failed her, but because people made her feel like they were wrong before she could even trust them. One evening, after leaving a conversation that left her more confused than when it began, Riley went to visit her godmother, Cora, a former trial lawyer with a mind like steel and a memory that never missed. She told her everything, how even her most basic thoughts now came with a second voice in her head asking, "Are you sure?" Cora listened quietly, then stood up and motioned for Riley to follow her to the back of the house. There, she opened a drawer and pulled out a pair of cracked reading glasses. "Put these on," she said. Riley did, and the world instantly blurred. "Try reading that," she said, pointing at a short sentence on the wall. Riley squinted but couldn't focus. "Exactly," Cora said. "You know what it says. You can feel what it says, but the lenses are bent, and the longer you wear them, the more you'll question if the problem is your eyes or the words themselves." Riley pulled the glasses off, stunned. Cora smiled. "That's what manipulators do. They twist your lens just enough so that your truth looks blurry. Then they stand behind you and ask, 'Are you sure you saw that?' Not because you're wrong, but because your clarity is dangerous to them." That night, Riley made a quiet vow to trust her first reaction again, to pause and feel, not ask and doubt. In the weeks that followed, things became clearer. She no longer explained her discomfort. She didn't debate her memory, and when someone's tone didn't match their words, she didn't ask them to explain. She listened to the silence underneath. Because when someone keeps making you second-guess what you clearly saw, it's not confusion. It's a warning, and the moment you notice it, you already know. Before we begin with the first lesson, if you find these videos helpful, I encourage you to subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on the latest content. Let's begin. Number 1. They subtly change the narrative. Let's talk about one of the most manipulative and overlooked tactics people use. Someone who subtly rewrites reality just enough to make you second-guess yourself. They don't outright lie. They don't scream or accuse. What they do is far more calculated. They simply adjust the details, small tweaks in the story, a shift in the tone, or a convenient omission. It's quiet, but it's powerful. You both experience the same moment, but when they describe it later, something feels off. It's not what actually happened, but it's close enough to sound believable. Close enough to make you think, wait, am I remembering this wrong? Here's the truth. They retell events with just enough distortion to make you question what actually happened. They're not interested in facts. They're interested in control. And control doesn't always come from yelling or aggression. It often shows up in the quiet reframing of what took place. They'll say things like, "That's not how it went," or "You're being dramatic," or "You always twist things." But if you rewind the tape in your head, you know what you saw, you know how you felt. Still, the more they correct you, the more you begin to question your own version of reality. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes your armor. Seneca once said, "Clarity of mind is your greatest defense against manipulation." And he was right. When someone tries to change the narrative, they're counting on one thing: you losing your clarity. The moment you doubt yourself, you hand them the power. But when your mind is grounded, when your inner clarity is intact, you see the game for what it is. You stop accepting their version of the truth and start trusting your own. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Jessica, was in a relationship with someone who constantly edited their shared experiences. If they had a disagreement, he'd later describe it as if she had overreacted or misunderstood him completely. If she brought up something hurtful, he said, he'd calmly explain that she took it the wrong way, or that he never said it like that. Over time, Jessica started shrinking, not physically, but emotionally. She stopped speaking up. She started apologizing for things she didn't even feel guilty for. And that was the moment she realized something wasn't right. When she started journaling and writing down the truth as she experienced it, she began to see the pattern, and slowly her clarity returned. She stopped accepting his version, and when she did, the dynamic shifted, because his power was never in truth, it was in confusion. So how do you respond when someone subtly changes the narrative? First, trust your memory. Don't abandon your perception to preserve their comfort. Second, document the truth on paper, in your mind, in your heart. And finally, don't argue for reality. Stand in it. When someone tries to manipulate your memory, remind yourself that the strongest resistance is clarity. At the end of the day, those who rewrite the past do so because they fear being held accountable in the present. Don't let your truth get lost in someone else's version. Clarity is power. Keep yours intact. Number 2, they laugh when you take things seriously. Let's talk about a tactic that feels subtle at first, but can leave deep emotional bruises. People who mock your seriousness. You open up about something that genuinely matters to you. A dream, a value, a decision you've been thinking about for weeks, and instead of being met with interest or support, they laugh. They raise an eyebrow, smirk, maybe toss out a sarcastic comment like, "Wow, you're really intense about this," or "Relax, it's not that deep." You feel the moment shift. What you said wasn't a joke, but suddenly you've become one. Here's the truth. When something matters to you and they mock your passion, they're not reacting to what you said. They're reacting to how uncomfortable your conviction makes them feel. Because conviction is powerful, it's grounded. It can't be easily manipulated, and that makes people who rely on emotional control feel threatened. Their laughter isn't harmless, it's strategic. It's a way to shrink you, to make you question your intensity, your purpose, your truth. The goal is disarmament. If they can't argue with your beliefs, they'll ridicule them. This is where Stoic wisdom comes in. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Mockery is often the weapon of those who fear sincerity." Think about that. There's strength in being sincere, in caring deeply, in standing for something when the world tells you to laugh it off. But to someone insecure, sincerity looks dangerous because it shines a light on everything they pretend not to feel. When you take things seriously, you confront the shallow with depth. And that confrontation exposes their own avoidance. So instead of joining you, they mock you, because mockery is easier than reflection. Let me share a story. A guy I know, let's call him Brandon, was passionate about mental health advocacy. He'd been through some heavy struggles of his own, and when he started speaking up about it, he was serious, intentional, committed. But in his social circle, every time he brought it up, a few people would chuckle. "Here comes the therapist," they'd say. Or, "Oh boy, here we go again with the deep talks." At first, Brandon tried to laugh along, tried to soften his message just to keep the peace. But something felt wrong. He started losing his fire. One night, after a group gathering, he realized he was starting to mock himself, preemptively dulling his voice to avoid their ridicule. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't just being teased, he was being silenced. So how do you respond when someone laughs at your seriousness? First, resist the urge to explain yourself. Your sincerity doesn't need defending. Second, notice the pattern. If someone consistently mocks what matters to you, they're showing you they don't value your depth. And finally, keep showing up as you are. The world doesn't need less seriousness. It needs less shame around being sincere. At the end of the day, if someone laughs at your conviction, it says more about their discomfort than your intensity. Don't shrink to fit their shallow. Stand tall in your depth. Because what's mocked today often becomes what's admired tomorrow. Stay grounded in your purpose and let them laugh. If you've watched the video this far, don't forget to leave a comment with a "thank God" and give it a like if you enjoyed the content. Your support means a lot and motivates me to keep creating more interesting videos. I hope you find inspiration in them and that we continue learning together. Thank you for your support. Number 3. They constantly say you're overthinking it. Let's talk about a phrase that seems innocent, but is often used as a weapon. You're overthinking it. It rolls off their tongue casually, sometimes even with a chuckle. You voice a concern. You bring up something that doesn't sit right. You ask a question that digs a little deeper than usual, and instead of engaging with it, they shut it down. You're overthinking it. That's all it takes. Suddenly, you're questioning yourself, not just your thoughts, but your ability to think clearly at all. It's one of the most overlooked forms of emotional control, and it works because it disguises itself as advice. Here's the truth. When someone constantly tells you you're overthinking, they're not always concerned about your peace. They're often concerned about your clarity. Because once you start thinking deeply, asking real questions, trusting your gut, they lose their grip. They don't want you to notice the patterns. They don't want you to follow the trail. They want you to stop right where you are, label it as just overthinking, and move on. Because the moment you dig deeper, you begin to expose what they're trying to hide. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes a compass. Epictetus once said, "The mind is not weak for questioning, only for silencing itself." Think about that. Your ability to think, question, analyze, that's not a flaw, that's a strength. But those who benefit from your confusion will always try to make you feel guilty for using it. They'll call you paranoid when you're perceptive, emotional when you're empathetic, overthinking when you're simply alert. It's all an attempt to make you silence the very instincts designed to protect you. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Amanda, was in a long-term relationship where her partner kept brushing off her concerns. If she questioned a late-night text, or sensed something was off in his tone, or noticed a change in routine, he'd immediately say, "You're overthinking again." At first, she believed him. She thought maybe she was too sensitive, too analytical, but the more it happened, the more disconnected she became from her own intuition, until one day she decided to trust herself instead. She journaled, she tracked her instincts, and when the truth finally came out, that he was hiding a second relationship, she wasn't even shocked. Her mind had been right all along. She had just been trained to doubt it. So how do you handle someone who constantly tells you you're overthinking? First, pause and ask yourself, am I really overthinking, or am I just thinking in a way that makes someone else uncomfortable? Second, start documenting. Clarity grows stronger when it's given space to breathe. And finally, reclaim your intuition. It's not there to hurt you. It's there to protect you. At the end of the day, don't let anyone convince you that questioning is weakness. The strongest people aren't the ones who ignore their thoughts. They're the ones who honor them. Your clarity is your compass. Keep it sharp. Number 4, they over-explain simple things. Let's talk about a tactic that's often overlooked because it hides behind politeness. People who over-explain simple things to you. It starts small. They walk you through something you already know. They repeat obvious instructions. They use a tone that feels just a little too slow, a little too careful, as if you're not capable of keeping up. On the surface, it might look like they're being helpful, but over time, that help begins to feel heavy. What they're really doing isn't explaining, they're diminishing. Here's the truth. When someone consistently over-explains basic things to you, they're not clarifying. They're chipping away at your confidence. It's subtle. It doesn't feel like a direct insult, but it leaves you questioning your own intelligence. You start second-guessing yourself. You pause before speaking, afraid you'll be corrected again. And soon their voice replaces your own. That's not guidance. It's control, dressed as kindness. This is where Stoic wisdom offers clarity. Seneca once said, "True wisdom uplifts. Only ego seeks to diminish." A wise person shares knowledge to elevate you, not to assert superiority. They meet you where you are and empower you to rise. But someone ruled by ego, they use explanations as a mirror, not to reflect truth, but to show you just how small they want you to feel. The irony is, they explain not because you lack understanding, but because they need to feel bigger. Let me tell you a story. A guy I know, let's call him Tyler, had a team leader at work who constantly explained things he already knew. Tyler had 5 years of experience in his field, but every time he presented an idea, this leader would interrupt with things like, "Let me walk you through how this works," or "You probably forgot this detail, so let me remind you." At first, Tyler brushed it off as standard management, but eventually he noticed a pattern. It only happened in front of others. It wasn't about guidance, it was about control. It was about publicly putting Tyler in his place. Slowly, Tyler's confidence started slipping, until one day he decided to keep a journal, not of his mistakes, but of his wins. Every time he made a correct call, solved a problem, led a successful meeting, he wrote it down. And after months of this quiet tracking, he realized the truth. He wasn't lacking. He was being diminished. So how do you respond to someone who over-explains simple things? First, recognize the pattern. If their help makes you feel smaller instead of stronger, it's not help, it's control. Second, reclaim your voice. Speak up, interrupt when needed. And finally, remind yourself of your competence, privately and publicly. You don't need to prove it to them. Just stop letting them rewrite it for you. At the end of the day, your intelligence doesn't need permission to shine. Anyone who consistently makes you feel small when you already know your worth is showing you their insecurity, not your inadequacy. Real wisdom doesn't patronize, it empowers. Keep your head clear and your self-respect intact. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights. Number 5. They always have an answer for everything you feel. Let's talk about a form of control that doesn't come with yelling or commands, but with certainty. The kind of certainty that hijacks your emotions. You open up about something you're feeling, maybe frustration, maybe confusion, maybe just a vague sense that something's off. And instead of listening, they jump in with a perfectly crafted explanation. Oh, you're probably just tired. Or, you're overthinking it again. Or worse, you're only feeling that way because of what happened last week, remember? Suddenly, the space between your experience and their version of it disappears. You're no longer allowed to feel something without it being narrated for you. Here's the truth. People who always have an answer for everything you feel aren't trying to understand you. They're trying to manage you. They want control, not clarity. And the easiest way to control someone is to make them believe that their emotions are unreliable, that they're wrong for feeling what they feel, that someone else knows better. When you surrender the right to your own emotional language, you become easier to influence. And they know that. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes essential. Marcus Aurelius said, "Let no man narrate your emotions on your behalf." That's not just poetic, it's a boundary. Your emotions are not a puzzle for others to solve. They are signals. They are data. And when someone constantly overrides them with their own interpretations, it's not support, it's psychological silencing. They're not easing your confusion. They're replacing it with their control. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Rachel, was always described as emotional by her partner. Whenever she got quiet, he'd say she was being moody. When she expressed discomfort, he'd say, "That's just your anxiety acting up again." When she tried to set a boundary, he'd respond with, "You're only saying that because you're overwhelmed from work." He had an answer for everything, except the actual truth. At first, Rachel thought he was just perceptive, maybe even trying to help. But over time, she stopped trusting herself. She'd feel uneasy, but say nothing. She'd feel hurt, but stay quiet. Until one day, she realized something powerful. She wasn't confused about what she felt. She was confused about whether she was allowed to feel it. So how do you respond to someone who always narrates your emotions for you? First, reclaim your internal voice. You don't need someone else to explain your experience. Second, stop seeking validation from those who override your truth. And third, practice grounding. Sit with your feelings long enough to recognize them before someone else tries to name them for you. At the end of the day, emotional clarity is your right. If someone consistently rewrites how you feel, they're not helping you. They're shaping you into someone easier to manage. But you don't need managing. You need space. Trust your feelings. Stand by them. Because when you let others define your emotions, you lose touch with yourself. And nothing is worth that. Number 6. They say you're too sensitive after insulting you. Let's talk about one of the most manipulative forms of emotional invalidation. When someone insults you, then immediately follows it up with, "You're too sensitive." It's a double hit. First, they wound you. Then they shame you for bleeding. At first, you react naturally. You speak up, you get quiet, you show emotion. But before your feelings even finish forming, they shut them down. Relax, it was just a joke. You're reading too much into it. Why do you always take things so personally? And just like that, the focus shifts from what they did to how you're reacting. Here's the truth. When someone consistently calls you too sensitive after hurting you, they're not giving you feedback. They're giving you a warning. A warning that your emotions are inconvenient to them, that your boundaries threaten their control. Because if you feel something, and they can label that feeling as too much, they win. They get to be cruel without consequence. And worse, they train you to believe that speaking up is wrong. Over time, you don't just question the insult, you question whether you even have the right to feel hurt at all. This is where Stoic insight becomes armor. Seneca wrote, "Sensitivity is not weakness. It is awareness misjudged by the unaware." Think about that. Being affected by someone's words isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It means your instincts are alive. It means you recognize disrespect. But to those who benefit from your silence, that awareness is a threat. So they label it, they belittle it, they try to shame it into disappearing. Let me tell you a story. A woman I know, let's call her Michelle, had a friend who would always disguise jabs as jokes. "Wow, you're wearing that? You actually think you're ready for that job? No offense, but you can be really naive." And every time Michelle pushed back, her friend would laugh it off with, "Geez, you're so sensitive," or "It was a compliment. Take it easy." At first, Michelle would question herself. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe she just needed thicker skin. But then she started noticing a pattern. The jokes always cut deep. They were always aimed at her confidence. And the sensitivity label, it only showed up when she tried to draw a line. So how do you handle someone who calls you too sensitive after they cross a line? First, stop defending your right to feel. Emotions aren't courtroom evidence, they're lived experience. Second, name the pattern, not to them, but to yourself. Clarity is power. And third, reinforce your boundary, kindly, firmly, without apology. At the end of the day, your sensitivity is not a flaw, it's feedback. It tells you when something is off, when someone's words are veiled daggers, when your peace is being tampered with. Don't dull your senses just to make someone else comfortable. If someone hurts you and mocks your reaction, they're not joking, they're controlling, and you deserve better than that. If you believe this video can help others, give it a like. It helps the YouTube algorithm show it to more people. And don't forget to subscribe for more awesome content coming your way. Share your thoughts in the comments. I will definitely reply. Number 7. They act like you misunderstood them every time. Let's talk about one of the most calculated forms of manipulation, when someone always claims you've misunderstood them. It doesn't matter how clearly you heard what they said or how precisely you repeat it back. The moment you hold them accountable, they pull the same trick. "That's not what I meant," or "You're twisting my words." And just like that, the focus shifts. No longer are you discussing what they said. Now you're defending your ability to comprehend. It's not a conversation anymore, it's mental chess, and they've been playing longer than you realize. Here's the truth. People who do this repeatedly aren't trying to clarify their intentions. They're trying to rewrite reality. Because if they can make you question your memory, your perception, or your understanding of the facts, they can stay blameless. Every disagreement becomes a glitch in communication, not a reflection of their behavior. And over time, you begin to doubt your own instincts. You start replaying conversations in your head, wondering if maybe you really did misinterpret. You get quiet, not because you agree, but because you're exhausted from the circular logic. This is where Stoic insight becomes essential armor. Marcus Aurelius once said, "Stand firm in your perception, and deception loses its grip." That's not arrogance, it's clarity. When you know what you heard, and you know what it meant to you, that clarity becomes power. You don't have to argue to defend it. You just have to stop surrendering it. Let me tell you a story. A man I know, let's call him Ethan, was in a relationship where this happened constantly. If he brought up something his partner had said, especially something unkind, she'd deny it flat out. "You're making that up. You misunderstood me. You're too sensitive to get my humor." It was always the same pattern: provoke, deny, then flip the blame. At first, Ethan tried harder to be fair. He recorded conversations in his mind, tried to reframe things in the most generous light. But it didn't matter how he phrased it. She would always move the goalpost. Until one day, during an argument, she accused him of inventing things. And he calmly replied, "No, I just finally stopped pretending I didn't hear you the first time." That's when everything changed. So how do you deal with someone who always claims you misunderstood them? First, stay rooted in what you know. If your intentions were clear and your memory is sound, don't let them gaslight you into confusion. Second, refuse to play their game. Don't engage in endless debates trying to prove your perception. Just name what you experienced and let that be enough. And third, protect your peace. Some people twist words not because they're unclear, but because clarity would force them to take responsibility. At the end of the day, miscommunication happens, but when it becomes a pattern, it's no longer innocent, it's strategy. And the only way to win that game is to stop playing it. Stand firm in what you heard. Stand firm in how it made you feel. Because when you trust your perception, you stop letting someone else rewrite your reality. If you found this valuable, hit like and subscribe for more powerful insights.